Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tank12, have any call me, I really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, and you guys voted for the AMBT, and you guys are disgusting, because this tank is, it's not very well balanced at all. It's a tier 8 premium medium tank for the Americans, and it's the first American auto reloader. And it was only available during this special event where you were able to bid for it, like the caravan, and I paid 19,000 gold for it because I wanted to make a video on it, and it turned out that the vehicle itself is very, very good. Very expensive tier 8 premium medium tank, but it certainly was worth it because no other American medium at tier 8 is as close to it or as interesting as the AMBT. The closest one would be the Astron Rex, but I think the AMBT still has the upper hand. And we're going to talk about why that is, why I think this tank is probably not a good idea for World of Tanks, but since it's already here, we cannot change the fact that there are a lot of them running around. And if it comes out, if it is something you should pick up. So, you have a 105mm gun. This is very important because it's supposed to be a tier 9 gun with very nice alpha damage of 360. So this tank can do all the way up to 450 damage if you fire non-AP, non-high explosive shells. With HE, if you do manage to pen, it's gonna be even better. It'll do all the way to 525 damage. The average penetration on the 105mm gun is not the best, 250mm, but I think for a medium tank, that is quite good. But the shell velocity makes up for it. 1,278 meters per second, that's very, very fast. It's basically on tier 10 levels. Now, if you switch over to the premium APCR shell, you get a whopping 60mm more penetration. To be fair, 63mm of more penetration on the shell. So that's tier 10 levels. If you're playing against tier 10 tanks and you load APCR shells, you basically have about the average pen of a Leopard 1 at tier 8. So that's pretty damn impressive and a bit game breaking if people are running around and only fire premium APCR. Shell velocity, as I mentioned, very, very good. The premium shells have even better shell velocity of 1,492 meters per second. So yeah, that's a very, very good gun. Just from these characteristics alone, the non-premium APCR or the standard APCR lacks a bit of pen, but I think you can still work with it if you know weak spots on certain tanks. Now, as it is an auto reloader, it also means that you'll have to reload quite a long time. The full reload is 41.56 seconds. Now, that is with a lot of training and equipment. But a single shot, the first round is going to take you forever. 17.2 seconds to reload. That is basically 5 shells for some tier 8 medium tanks. So yeah, you do not want to fire the first shell ever. You always only want to fire the second one or the third one, because you can see the reload time goes down. If you have 2 shells in there, it's only going to take you 10.8 seconds to reload quickly and fully, and you do not want to be caught with your pants down below. As with any autoloader or auto reloader, you do not want to get caught with your pants at your ankles. So the intra-clip reload is 3 seconds between every single shot for at least the 2 shots that you fire, because the first one you already reload directly into the gun. The gun traverse is not the best. For a medium tank, it's a bit lacking, 32.23 degrees per second. That is also with improved field modifications. 9 degrees of gun impression is very, very nice though. So this tank is a very good ridgeline warrior, and it's not just because of the gun depression. Aim time and the dispersion on this vehicle are a bit lacking, but with the right equipment, you can basically get past that and not have to worry too much about the bad aim time and the dispersion, which is okay. Survivability wise, this tank doesn't have a lot of HP, 1,300. The hull armor is quite weak, but it is angled nicely at the front. So the lower plate is the one place you want to hit this tank at. The side can be easily overmatched with anything, and the rear as well. Now, the turret, on the other hand, has some very nice armor. So it's a classic hull-down tank that can do a lot of damage because it has 250 millimeters of frontal turret armor. And it's also nicely sloped, so a lot of shots will bounce off like the cheeks. The cupola is quite dominant, so it is a place of weakness that you can shoot, but the side of the turret is quite weak, 70 and 50 at the rear. So armor-wise, it's very, very strong if facing the opponents in a hull-down position where they are in front of you, but it doesn't really hold anything in its hands when it has to fight against vehicles that are on its side. Mobility-wise, this tank is a bit slow. Certainly for its weight, it only weighs 38 tons, so it's quite light, so do not ram anything. Its top speed is 40 kilometers per hour, so 40 kilometers per hour top speed is a bit lacking. 15 kilometers per hour in reverse is also not the best, but the specific power to weight ratio is actually quite nice at 20.19. That is with turbo. The turbo is something I would highly recommend on this tank because it'll give you better top speed. I still think you're going to be able to get to places fairly quickly, especially with the traverse speed of 40.52 degrees per second, which is certainly fine for a medium tank. Generally speaking, I think the mobility is okay. It's just not on par with other tanks at tier 8. You obviously cannot compare it to the Burrasque, you cannot compare it to the T-44-100. You can't even compare it to the Astron Rex because the Astron Rex has a much better top speed, but way worse specific power to weight ratio. So I still think this tank will do just fine from getting from point A to B. Concealment wise, it's also not the worst. And spotting wise, I think it's 380 meter space view range, as you can see right here, which is okay, but could have been better. Generally speaking, 420 with vents and a little bit of training certainly works in your favor. One thing you should really have on this tank is intuition, because when you have intuition, when you have one shell loaded completely in your tank, you can quickly switch the shell out for another shell type if you need the APCR shells or the high explosive shells. You can just do that very quickly and it'll take you like 5 seconds to load in the second shell. But it will not load in all of the other shells. It will only load in the first shell, so keep that in mind. Moving on to the field modifications real quick. I went with light alloy mounting points to have better hull traverse and gun traverse. This is actually quite important on this tank, especially on the turret. You want to have improved sight, so you want to have better aim or smaller aiming circle. You want to have anti-reflective headlight coating to stay more hidden, and finally you want to have scouting because survivability is something that I do not value on a medium tank, and I went with improved ventilations to get the better rate of fire right there. Now, one of the things that I went for right here is turbo. I think turbo is quite important. Then I went with improved ventilations. What you could also do is you can go with improved rotation mechanism right here, and then you'll have much better gun traverse speed, or at least you'd have like 35 degrees per second turret traverse. But I still think it's fine at the moment and I can live with it. So I went with vents, but you can also go for the coated optics if you're on an open map as a second loadout. And I finally went with the vertical stabilizer class 1 because for me it was actually needed. This tank has some pretty bad dispersion values and this helps a lot. This helps a lot when you have to shoot something. The aim time goes down, everything goes down, everything shrinks. So that's why I have the vertical stabilizer class 1 on it, because this is a tank that I mainly use to do damage with. So, having talked about all of that, what is this tank like in combat? The thing is, it's absolutely filthy. It's really filthy against anything that you're going up against. With 278 millimeters of penetration on the premium APCR shells, you can basically ruin a day of any player, even tier 10 tanks. So, I'd say without further ado, we jump into the gameplay, see what it's like to play this tank, and then have the final verdict. Okay, so for the first gameplay, we're playing in a tier 10 matchup, and I decided to pick this one because you can really see the difference between standard APCR and premium APCR ammunition when you're playing this tank. That is a trend that I think we've been able to witness for a while now, that the standard pen of the vehicles, usually tier for tier, is okay, it's just enough, but as soon as they add tier 9 vehicles or tier 10 tanks, the standard pen just doesn't hold up anymore. Usually, I think that's the way it's supposed to be, but the premium pen is that good that maybe only using the premium ammunition, even in a tier 8 setting, is the right way to play the vehicle. And I think that Wargaming, they have been doing this for a while now, are trying to lure you into using that and not to use the standard APCR shells, which are very good in their own right in terms of shell velocity, but having 250 millimeters of penetration with a 25% drop off or 25% increase, well, you're basically rolling your dices all of the time. Same thing happens with the premium APCR shells, but having minus 25% or plus 25% with 278 millimeters of penetration is still going to be somewhere along the lines of 250 millimeters of penetration in the worst case scenario. So I think, generally speaking, you're going to be just fine when you're playing with the APCR shells, the premium ones that is. But they're extremely expensive, and I still would say that the standard APCR shells are good enough against most of the vehicles, but as soon as you have to hit something with a little bit of armor, you're looking down the drain. And it being an auto reloader, I can understand why people only use premium APCR, because in the end, even with intuition, you do get some nice bonuses, like the first shell you can reload in 5 seconds, but all of the other shells that you have on your vehicle, well, they're just going to disappear. So right here, I am just trying to unload a couple of shells. I want to keep the last shell remaining in my vehicle so that I can reload faster. You always want to have one shell in your tank, even if it feels like it, even if you have this urge that you want to fire the last one, because it's really, really important that you look into the reload. So we have the T10 right here. He moves over and gets completely obliterated by the VZ55 and us. He didn't have a lot of patience. And using this position right here with this bush, you can actually stay hidden for a very long time, but they pre-fire this spot. If you shoot someone from here, they open all guns towards this direction usually, and it becomes a very difficult task to hold this corner. But so far we've done 1,120 damage. We haven't really had to work hard for it. The only thing we had to do was find the weak spots, and you could see that when the Kranwagen was spotted, even though the Kranwagen doesn't have the best armor, at least hull armor, in terms of being a tier 10 heavy tank, it still will be able to hold up just fine against these 215 millimeters of penetration that we have with the standard APCR shells. That is why I'm probably going to be switching to the premium APCR shells, which will make life so much easier. But having this damage potential of being able to do about 1,000 damage with 3 shots is pretty damn nice. With RNG, it can be a bit more, it can be a bit less. But generally speaking, I think this is one of the tanks that was supposed to be a tier 10 vehicle and was just downsized to a tier 8. They readjusted some of the stats to make it appear okay to be in tier 8, but I think a majority of the things that we have in this tank, they scream tier 10. The gun being a 105mm gun, the look of the vehicle, design of it. So generally speaking, I think we are more or less looking at a tier 10 that they downsized to tier 8. Now, is it a flawless tank? No, it is not. As I mentioned, it is not one of the fastest medium tanks out there. That's just one of the curses that you have as an American World of Tanks player or an American vehicle connoisseur, because they're usually not the fastest ones out there. Turret armor is really sturdy. That's hopefully one thing we can show off in this gameplay or the next. Hull armor, on the other hand, is not going to work very well in your favor. That also means you don't have a lot of HP, and if you do get caught out, you're going to eat a lot of shells. Heat shells will actually go through your turret, depending on the right angle, but just like everything else, well, you still have to have the right angle, right? So we're just pushing the Object 705A now because I decided to go to the other side. I knew that the Leopard 1 was hiding at B9, and I didn't want to cross the open field and get completely annihilated by the caravan and the Skoda T50, because they're still autoloaders. But now you can actually see the power of the premium APCR shell if you use it against a tier 8 opponent. T26 E5, not a bad tank per se, but you can just see that we go right through the turret, we go right through the cupola. A cupola which is rather strong, and with the 250mm of penetration, we probably would have bounced at least one shell. I can almost guarantee that, because the 250mm of penetration are just not good enough most of the time to actually go through that T26 E5's weak spot up there. But having the premium shells, well, it kind of goes against the entire idea of a premium tank. You're trying to earn credits, and when you're firing 3 of these shells, well, it's gonna cost you about, let me guess, I think one shell is like 4,000, a bit more than 4,000. If you fire all 3 of them, yeah, 12k credits that go down the drain for basically nothing. So that's why I usually always try to go back to the non-premium APCR, even if sometimes it doesn't work out in our favor. But you can see, you know, the damage potential is incredible when you're playing this tank. We just punished the Skoda T50 twice, 372, 362, and yeah, these are like the average rolls you get. So as I mentioned, it's basically on par with a tier 10 medium tank in doing the damage, maybe a bit less than that, but it's still very close to it. And generally speaking, you know, it's pretty damn crazy if you think about it, being able to do that kind of damage to a tier 9 counterpart. But that is the World of Tanks of today. That is the premium of 2022. That is the tank that they've released. And yeah, it's the AMBT that has a very competitive gun, a really, really nice gun, which from the characteristics doesn't look to be that impressive, at least in terms of penetration, in terms of accuracy and aim time. But I think with the right equipment, you can make this a very, very dangerous vehicle, especially in a hull down situation. We didn't really have to use our armor much. The Predator 65 did bounce, no standard B bounced of our turret. Other than that, most of the shells we did eat somewhere on our vehicle. Like right here, we had a heat shell go through our side. It doesn't have a lot of HP. That's one of the main downsides to it. But you can actually do quite a lot with the AMBT. So I'm going to show you guys a gameplay where it's basically continuous fire in a position that is very difficult to hold, but which we actually won. But the gameplay kind of stops because I died early on in the battle, but still had a little bit of an impact. So we're going to jump over to that gameplay, then have the final verdict. So it's another tier 10 experience, and this time around, just like last game, probably there was no artillery, but we have a very, very important place to be when we're playing on Fisherman's Bay. The middle is very vital to this map, and one of the things I noticed is that the bushes don't really work. The bushes are too close to one another, and thus the middle part is a very dangerous place to be. So I do totally realize when players are here that don't really want to be here, because it's a place that is very, very dangerous to get out of. So what I'm doing right here is I wanted to test out the premium APCR shells. First target we have is the T42. We track him, somebody shoots him, and we ammo wreck him. So yeah, pretty disgusting. That's something you can do with this tank. The in-between shot, obviously still have to wait a little bit in between the shots, but having this damage that you can do with a single shot, adding a second one on top of that, and being able to reload at the same time, you know, and still have like 3 shots around, that's pretty damn devastating at tier 8. So, I mean, you have all seen the Progetto, but it's basically a Progetto that doesn't have the mobility or very much reduced mobility, but at the same time it has the alpha damage that the Progetto just lacks. Progetto does reload faster, has probably better DPM as well, but this thing just has the raw power, which I think some players will probably prefer more than with the Progetto, because with the Progetto you'll really have to aim and hit several shots, and it just doesn't have the turret armor that this vehicle has. So sitting here in the middle, it's a bit awkward because we know there's an E50M right next to us. There are some other vehicles. We bounced STA2 because it was a very, very, very bad shot that we fired, and I decided to trade, which is a positive trade for me in the end, but it's a bit of a disappointing roll with 337. I decided to reload standard ammunition because engaging STA2 with premium ammunition feels a bit disgusting, and I just wanted to actually try it out against tier 10 tanks. Turns out there are no tier 10 tanks that we can shoot right now except for the E50M, who's sitting right there. This also gives me a little bit of a moment to talk about the camouflage values that we have on the vehicle. In of itself, it's not the best vehicle for camo, but we're making it work quite nicely here. We actually got blind fired. We haven't been spotted, but since I reversed out like this quite aggressively, I do get hit by the E50M because the STI or the ST1 is sitting at the back. Unfortunately for us, it was a bit of a misplay on our part. There's the Tiger 2, and now with the 250mm of penetration, it is a bit awkward. You'll always have to look at the vehicles, look at the weak spots, and be really sure of being able to hit these weak spots, because if you don't, yeah, basically I wouldn't fire, because it's kind of a waste to shoot at something where you know you can't go through. 250mm at tier 8 sounds pretty damn nice, but even some tier 8 heavies do have quite good armor, making it very difficult to be very reliable. So there comes the Tiger 2. We actually get like a profile of his side armor. It's quite early. I'm making this video at like 6 a.m. I'm just waiting for him to actually back up. Get one shot into him, put a nice 363 damage round, and if you stay close to this building, you usually can be just safe enough. If you move up a little bit further though, you're going to be in hot water. If you move up, if you back up a little bit, you're gonna have a bit of a problem. So there's the E50M, and this is the time where you can actually see that there is a bit of limitation for the penetration. We desperately are trying to find the weak spot in the lower plate. We miss, or at least we bounce, and we get punished for it by the Super Conqueror, who's not firing APCR. So I've got to commend that Super Conqueror. I haven't seen a Super Conqueror in years that hasn't fired APCR only, so I got to commend that player. He's probably one of the only players who's using AP shells like me on a Super Conqueror, and thus doesn't really have any kind of good win percentage. But either way, we're now just in a very awkward position because the middle is slowly but surely fading. The ST1 and I, we both don't have a lot of HP, and they still have an E50M and an SDA2. So we'll have to adapt a little bit. Still, if you hit the weak spot, usually lower plate, it will work, even on a tier 10 medium tank like the E50M. That's the thing, you just gotta learn how to, when to move up, when to shoot. And if you're using the turret armor in the right scenario, well, you're gonna be able to bounce a lot of shells. I'm probably going to be showing off one last clip after this battle. We do trade again with the SDA2. I didn't want to do that, but the SDA2 is no dummy. He knows if he gets spotted right there and he doesn't see anything, it means that I just move into the bushes and that I'm still there and he just has to fire. So I fire, I hit him, and he obviously hits me because I light up immediately. But look at this. This is pretty damn beautiful. We hit the Batchat 25T from the side and we do nice bit of damage. And if you think about that, for a tier 8, doing casually 3000 damage every other game, as long as you can stay a little bit hidden, or at least you can protect your vehicle from incoming fire, it is a really powerful tool. We also bounced the E50M, but yeah, as I mentioned, the limitations of the standard penetration on the vehicle just doesn't really allow us to penetrate any place on the tank, and we weren't able to really hit the cupola on the E50M. So one final replay where we're going to talk about the turret armor just real fast and then have the final verdict to show off what this tank is really about and to talk about the fact, is it worth it or not. So we are on the map Live Oaks, which is also titled North America. There are several maps that are titled North America, and hopefully I can show you guys the armor layout on the turret, because the turret is quite sturdy. We do get penetrated by the Kunzepanzer, and I'm not really sure where he hit me because I'm very confused. I'm looking for the impact of his shell, but there's no hole and I can't really find it anywhere. So it's a bit awkward, but this tank does do fairly well on ridgelines, but it's not invincible, as you can see right there. He hits our lower plate, and now we're down to 581 HP. One of the major problems with playing this tank is that you overestimate the ability of protection, or you overestimate the protection you have on this tank, and you sometimes think that 9 degrees of gun depression is just enough to only show your turret. It's not always the case. Sometimes other parts of your vehicle are sticking out as well, but usually it will do the job. You just have to be really, really careful because you only have 1,300 HP, especially when you're going up against tier 9, tier 10 vehicles. You can die very quickly, so you want to be careful with that, and you only want to show your turret. You could see that the Tiger there, the King Tiger, he shot at our turret, and he was having a little bit of a problem going through. That's what will happen most of the time when they're trying to shoot your turret. But if they do get a shot on your hull, you're going to have a little bit of a problem. So right there we spot the Kunze. This is also another thing. My vehicle is completely trimmed for max damage potential by using the gun and not really spotting. This is one of the few medium tanks where I don't really go very hard on the spotting. You can see the T103 just puts a big shell into the side of us, and thus he kind of ruins any last remaining chance of us surviving this kind of battle if we get fired or shot at for another time. But we do have a little bit of payback with very low roll, 298. That can happen in this vehicle, but still, I think generally speaking, the the vehicle in of itself, it still just has this very novel feature of having an auto reloader at tier 8, and it's so great. I even think that the mobility on the tank itself is rather nice. I know that the 45 kilometers per hour is not going to be, ripping out any trees, and the power to weight ratio is not going to be the best. But for an American vehicle, where I've been playing American tanks that have been sluggish, American tanks at tier 8 that are rather slow, this feels like a pretty impressive vehicle in terms of mobility, because all of the American tanks at tier 8 are just very sluggish and slow, and I don't have really the feeling that this is the case with this tank, as long as you use the turbo. And with the turbo, I think this tank will get you from point A to B fairly fast, and it's going to be reliable enough. So yeah, is this a tank that is worth it? Yes. If you like autoloaders, if you like medium tanks, I think this is a tank you'll be enjoying. Have you liked the Progetto 46? Did you like the tier 8 Italian premium tank, or the Pantera? I think you're gonna enjoy this tank because it has better alpha damage. Doesn't have better pen, but better alpha damage. And it's just a very novel kind of feature. It's the first American tank with an auto reloader. And its armor is actually sturdy enough, at least on the turret side, to withstand a couple of shots. We just bounced another one from the AE phase 1. We bounced another one. We should have been dead by this point, but I wanted to close in and put a little bit of pressure on these guys. I should be dead, and I'm waiting for my team to do anything. My team actually hasn't really moved, and now I'm going to get absolutely eradicated by the E75 because he made a play. But still, in the end, I think the AMBT, if you're in a hold down position in a tier 8 match, God forbid you're playing against tier 6 vehicles, this is a really powerful tank, and it certainly holds up very nicely in most games of World Tanks. If you're going up against tier 9 tanks and tier 10 tanks, you still have the ability to actually use the 275 millimeters of penetration, 278 on the premium APCR shells. That's gonna basically give you all of the free power and all of the mobility, flexibility to still be competitive at tier 8 and tier 9 and 10. And that's pretty much one of the main things you want to see when you have a premium tank, that there is a little bit of longevity with it. And I think the AMBT is a pretty damn good tank. Very enjoyable one, but it's not invincible. The turret armor is very good. The hull armor lacks any kind of protection, so if you get the chance, catch this guy when he's reloading. The reload takes quite a long time. If you know he has fired 2 or 3 shots, he only has 1 more shot remaining. If he fired 2, keep in mind that he might just be trying to withhold the final shot. And finally, the pen on the APCR shell is not very good on the non-premium. So if you're a tank with a little bit of armor and he's firing non-premium APCR, you can actually bully the AMBT quite a bit, because he'll have to look for a weak spot, and he cannot just immediately switch to the premium APCR shell. So yeah, that is my verdict. Should you get it if you have the chance in the future? I would certainly get it, but I wouldn't, pay like a huge sum, which is a bit hypocritical of me, because I did pay a huge sum when it was available on the caravan event. But the thing is, for me personally, because I do make content, I wanted to make a review. I didn't really care. So I had the gold lying around. I already have all the tanks I want, and I went for it. And I really wanted to get the tank to be able to show it off. Didn't really know a lot about the AMBT beforehand, and it came kind of out of the blue. And it turns out it's one of the premium tanks that I do play a lot now. I do enjoy it, and I do have some pretty good games in it. And yeah, generally speaking, I think if you have fun, why not? It's a nice tank. And I love the Progetto 46, so I did enjoy the AMBT from the very start. Takes a bit of time to get used to the lack of pen and the reload time and everything, but if you get the hang of it, you're gonna have a very powerful vehicle at your disposal. Pretty OP, to be fair. So I hope you guys did enjoy this video. As always, comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one.